fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh, they're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Oh, there we have Sim. That is good timing. It's just connecting to
Let's
the audio.
see. All right. Hey, Andy, how's it going today?
It is going very well, Sim. We're just going ahead, and the guys at Contacting the Desert have asked us just to keep recording. So this will just be going out anyway. Sim, I've just been talking for my first time ever to an audience that isn't actually there because it's being recorded, just on my own. And I've been talking about how we have spoken on my podcast previously a little bit about resonance or remote viewing, and you're going to explain the differences of those as well. But I'm going to get into it. And again, you're one of the speakers at Contacting the Desert I was really looking forward to catching up with this year. I've spoken to you before, but I find you and your field fascinating, and there's so much we could talk about with it as well.
Oh,
now,
yeah, thanks.
First off, at Contacting the Desert, I just want you to talk a little bit about what can people expect to hear and see from you this year.
Oh, well, thanks a lot, Andy. Thanks for having me here again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, no, so I have this presentation I put together about seriously looking at the idea that there are parallel realities, what science has produced so far, the theories, well-formed theories that come from quantum mechanics, the empirical experiments that seem are being planned at Oak Ridge National Labs to look for particles that don't seem to be delayed a little bit in ways that they decay, which suggests that there's some sort of interference possibly from another parallel reality. The idea that this is something we should look at seriously. It's not just in the realm of science fiction. Increasingly, just like the UFO, UAP topic is becoming more accepted day by day, it seems, by the larger society, by the government. Physicists are looking at the multiverse idea with increasing degrees of sincere curiosity and saying maybe this is what's going on and we can't rule it out. I mean, you can always say, Andy, I don't feel like they're parallel realities, but the same thing is you don't feel like you're orbiting around the Earth right now or that you're spinning around the sun. It's just not something you're going to feel. So that's one presentation. The other presentation, Andy, is a remote viewing, as you know, I call it resonant viewing workshop, where we actually go through the basic steps of how it works. It's a hands-on practical workshop, how to do RV, and I have a practice target there where we go through step by step, and you can see how you do picking up non-local information, however it comes across to you. So those are the two. We have tonight, well, we're recording this on Sunday, there is the remote viewing panel about the secret history of remote viewing. So
that is what I'm very much looking forward to as well. Now, listen, you talked about quite a lot there. The first one, parallel realities. And what I'm going to later on ask your thoughts on the task force report and things like that, which very much focuses on the nuts and bolts and as real as it can get for a mainstream conversation at this point. But when you talk about parallel realities, for you, what are the implications of the discovery of a parallel or multiple realities alongside our own?
Yeah, I think it's extremely logical that this would be true. Throughout the history of science, go back 500 years and move forward, what have we found in the last 500 years in scientific discovery? That there are more and more planets out there, more and more galaxies. The big discovery in the late 1500s, early 1600s, Copernican theory, and then Galileo got a telescope to actually check out Copernicus, discovered, hey, this idea, this Ptolemaic idea doesn't quite make sense, that we're the center of the universe with a couple planets. I don't know how many planets they were aware of back then, just a few. And then Galileo discovered Jupiter. And initially they thought that was another galaxy, another solar system with planets going around it. When they looked at Jupiter, they hadn't seen Jupiter before. And they said, maybe it's another solar system. And this began this whole process, moving away from theological interpretations of science based on, religious ideas that somehow we're the center of God's universe, to realize, no, we're actually sort of an average planet in an average solar system, kind of an ordinary galaxy, one of many of, millions and now billions of galaxies. I have to tell you, at the time Einstein was developing his general relativity theory, do you know they didn't know of a single galaxy beyond the Milky Way? That was all that was known just a little less than 100 years ago. How things change in just 100 years to where we are now. So isn't it a logical extension that we keep realizing, as there are more and more galaxies and more exoplanets every day, we find there are more exoplanets that similar to Earth, similar levels of, receive solar radiation from their sun that could host life. It seems to make sense that we would find that there are other realities nested within our own reality, Andy, that could have their own life forms, types of consciousness. It's highly conceivable, the different ways to get to parallel realities, many different ways they could exist. But that's where you would sort of logically think it would go. And I think I know we'll talk about the UAP report, but that started with OSAP. And OSAP was looking at Skinwalker Ranch. And what do you have at Skinwalker Ranch? A whole range of phenomena. I think George Knapp called it a general continuum of weirdness or something. I mean, how do you deal with all different life forms and creatures and cryptids that can just appear and disappear? I mean, how you talk about that? Parallel realities is one way to do that.
Do you think we're at a natural point for the conversation changing? You gave some great examples there, back to the 1600s and before and then after, of points where science thought it was at its peak and we thought we knew almost as much as we were going to, without tweaking things a little bit. And then along came radical scientists or thinkers who dared to challenge that zeitgeist, and they were laughed at or mocked. And then these ideas are what we now know as the normal. Do you think in 100 years' time we could look back to now and where that we have these thinkers, and I'm just going to name a mainstream scientist like Avi Loeb, who has come out and got some national press and attention as being one of the first to turn around as a Harvard professor and say, we should talk about aliens, that in 100 years' time we'll look back and say more should have done that?
Right. So isn't it Einstein who said that new ideas go through 3 stages? First, they're ridiculed, then they're violently opposed, and then they're accepted as self-evident truth. It doesn't mean that every single idea turns out to be true, but a lot of them more turn out to be true than you would expect. And I would easily imagine, Andy, 100 years from now, the Avi Loebs and others like him who were brave enough. And you saw that little video clip, did you not, where he's really chastised by his colleagues on a Zoom call?
Yeah.
They say, we're really disappointed in you for, that's what science and academics should be. It should be lots of different points of view. Who said there has to be a consensus? These consensus often turn out to be wrong. Why stick with something that's old hat? So yeah, I could easily imagine in 100 years that we accept parallel realities, if there are other realities that for the most part we don't interact with, that are in the same space-time as we are at another frequency. We know we only perceive a narrow range of frequencies with our senses. There could be many other realities at slightly different frequencies or different physics constants, the fine constant, you just change it a little bit. We wouldn't really interact with them. They would seem sort of invisible and we would seem that way to them. But that doesn't mean there isn't a little bleed through once in a while. And I often wonder whether that explains what we see with some of these phenomena. When you see phenomena that, and this doesn't really apply to the Tic Tac type objects, but things that just sort of materialize and then disappear, it's part of the UFO phenomenology. People have seen things like this, and cryptid types of creatures that just seem to show up and then become invisible as they're watching them. That seems to lend itself to another type of scientific explanation, which we really haven't reached yet. And they could be parallel realities that, have something to do with that.
I think we talked about on my podcast that I like analogies, and I talked about a radio transistor that you're tuning in, and as you go through, you pick up some faint signals, and at times you hear something coming through you're not expecting, and maybe that's what we as receivers are seeing as we go through the frequencies, that sometimes stuff bleeds through that we're not expecting on us as the radio.
Exactly. No, Andy, I think it's a very good analogy. As a kid, I used to build electronic kits, and I was always amazed, even with a crystal radio, no battery required, that nearby AM station was loud enough for you to hear, just because the amplitude gets converted as a frequency into sound through your earpiece, into electricity and then sound, and you always got bleed through of other stations. Now it's the same analogy, is that all it would mean is what we see as reality is one channel in the whole radio spectrum. It's not that outlandish an idea. We accept it with radio and television and other types of broadcast. I used to be into shortwave radio. It was always interesting to listen to all these different countries, fascinating to listen to the different points of view from their news, and that was a lot of fun, but it sort of got me used to the idea that in the same sort of frequency spectrum, there can be different stations. And often stations don't know of each other. You could just be listening to Voice of America forever, not realizing that, the voice of North Korea was right there on a neighboring channel, but they were there the whole time. You just didn't pick it up. So I think right now we don't have any hard proof that it works this way, but it seems to me explains a lot of phenomena, not just in the UFO area, as you realize, but other phenomena that seem related to it, and some of the strange electromagnetic effects that seem to occur around these phenomena. I think it's something we need to consider. And again, increasingly scientists, physicists, Sean Carroll being one, they've written whole books about this recently, Something Deeply Hidden, that this is actually the simplest explanation for what we perceive. It's not the most complex. It's just quantum mechanics at its most straightforward interpretation yields parallel realities. You don't have to add anything else in. It's purely a product of the Schrodinger wave function.
Now, people can hear a lot more about that in your parallel realities presentation.
Sure.
And saying parallel realities with a Scottish accent's a bit of a tongue twister, folks, so apologies. You also have your resonance viewing workshop. And just before you came on, I explained you've got remote viewing and resonance viewing, which you prefer the term resonance, just given the connotations of what it actually is. So can you talk a little bit about remote/resonance viewing?
Yeah, well, it's the big surprise of the lifetime. I didn't think it would work when I took the class. I actually really went in as a skeptic. I mean, open-minded skeptic. I was open to it. I didn't expect that I would get results that would show that I had any sort of psychic ability. But everyone in the class got results in 2 or 3 days. My classes were at the Farsight Institute in Atlanta in 1996. And those classes were 8 days long. And it was really shocking, Andy, to see that you could reproduce a picture with a high level of fidelity, just sketching and writing what was showing up in your mind's eye, that you just had the intent to describe the site that you would be shown in 15 or 20 minutes. And somehow you just, cast aside your doubts and just let the pen move around. And all of a sudden you've drawn the picture. I've done this recently on my bulletin board, superpowersbiomine.com. Ingo's old URL, it was discarded. And I just put up some targets there, and I was just shocked at some of the accuracy. People, get so much detail. We had a medieval clock, and they got all the curves and the crescents and just the design. It's shocking when it works. So this is our ability to pick up non-local information, literally get information from a distant place or person or event, sitting here, wherever we are. To me, it's because the information is there, as you said before, kind of like a radio frequency. You tune to it. We don't know exactly how you do that, but somehow you tune to it, and there's information there, and you just write it down before your skepticism sinks in too deeply. And lo and behold, a good percentage of the time, much more than you would expect just from a sort of random function, you get some very accurate information. It can describe even events into the future by a few days with a 60-70% degree of accuracy, in a kind of on-off binary outcome, this or that, this possibility or this possibility. So it's really an astounding finding. I know the military used this, and we'll probably talk about that tonight, for 20 plus years with, psychic espionage, different things, types of intelligence activities that governments do. And they kept tasking these viewers over and over. They wouldn't have kept doing that if they weren't getting something useful. So it's a real surprising finding, but it fits into this. Is our formal definition of reality just too limited? Is there something more going on? I like RV, Andy, because it's something that the average person can do just to show themselves that they have abilities they didn't know they had, and that all this talk about quantum mechanics and different ways of accessing reality is something you can actually see yourself do on a piece of paper.
Now, before I ask you about the average person and the practicalities of RVing, what were the military using this for and why?
Well, they started doing it here in the US because they found out that the Soviets were doing this. The Soviets had an extensive psychic espionage program. And during the Cold War, the US just decided, oh, if they have it, we have to have it too. Initially, it was done as a type of it was started just to see how much would someone be able to detect about American military abilities and capabilities. So they just did it to see what could someone pick up, and they were surprised that you could pick up a lot. You could pick up code names and folders and get all sorts of classified, special access program information you shouldn't be getting from sitting here in your chair. That was kind of alarming to the military. So, threats generate funding, as we know. You can throw that word in, you'll get a lot of funding. So this was considered not only the USSR, but China had extensive, I'm told, 5 different institutes that were looking into this. And excuse me there.
That's okay.
They realized we had to have it too. So they developed this program. You use it. Initially, I guess the idea was to use it on the battlefield, but it's a little slow. You have to start drawing and writing. It can take a little while for the information to show up. So it wasn't really useful immediately on the battlefield to find out where the enemy troops were, enemy weapons, but it could be used to look at enemy technologies, adversaries' technologies. It was used extensively for drug interdiction in the US, counter narcotics operations, and a host of other purposes. It seems that some of those are still classified. We're not told exactly what these projects were. I'm curious if some of them were used in this UFO UAP theater of information. I mean, we know Ingo viewed these. I'm wondering how much that happened and if it's still classified. I mean, they must have been seeing these objects back then too, and I'm sure that some of the tasking involved those objects.
And that's some of the stories involved around this, and
yes,
are that people are RVing bases on other planets, or that it could be other realities that they're potentially RVing onto craft and seeing beings. How much stock do you put into some of those?
Yeah, well, we did that a lot at my Mount Baldy Institute in Boulder. We would give those in the advanced class after people had the basic techniques and the sort of the mainstream intermediate levels, the matrix, as it's called. In the advanced class, we would, send people to a craft, and then if they seem to have good target contact, we haven't told them what they're looking at. You say, move inside the man-made and describe. That's just generic language. Move inside something made by, people or intelligence technology. And sometimes they say, wow, I feel like I'm inside a flying saucer. I feel like I'm being watched. The beings are telling me I shouldn't be here. It's surprising. People would say they're telling me I shouldn't be here. I want to end the session. It's happened many times. We viewed the Phoenix lights and different objects back then that were being seen. So I do put stock in it. When you're in the RV state, you're not letting any skepticism in. It's an open state where new information could come through that normally you might block. So it is actually a good way to interact with UFO, ET sorts of phenomena, because you're not allowed to edit anything out during the session. You literally have to write down everything you're getting. So UFO targets are good targets. It's hard to interpret exactly where they are, but you can do these kind of locational exercises to trace where they came from. And that's one way to get information. Now, the only drawback, we can't really verify at the end of the session how much of it was accurate the way we can with a normal verifiable target. But once in a while, they're fun to do, and people seem to learn something from it. And it shows us perhaps this is really what it seems to be, this phenomenon.
And would you say that would be the main practicality for the average person who wants to get involved, that contact with other intelligences? You know, if someone's listening to this just now who thinks after dinner, I'm going to sit down, and Sim's got a great YouTube channel, you can go on and watch some of the stuff there.
Right.
They might book into the RV workshop and they want to try it themselves. What are some of the first sorts of things they may be looking at?
Well, it's a good question, and it's really hard to tell because each person is different. The RV signal works through the path of least resistance, kind of the way lightning is going to find the fastest point to the ground. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen to you when you do this. I honestly don't know. It is good for many things. The main thing is to just get in touch with this other sensory ability. Ingo Swann, really the grandfather of a lot of these techniques, the written technique at least, that was pioneered at SRI in the 70s. I mean, he felt we had more senses than science, formal science acknowledges. So this is a way to get in touch with those senses and perceive reality in a different way. It's kind of like a gateway to a wider range of phenomena. It does seem to me, Andy, seriously, that people who have done RV, they seem to gravitate towards a lot of topics that we talk about on your podcast that are mentioned and covered at Contact in the Desert. It is surprising, but it leads us to believe there's a deeper reality, and that most of the time our superficial consciousness doesn't access it or contact it. When you open the floodgates a little bit, whatever is there in the greater reality comes through. I've had people do RV that subsequently started doing channeling, not even by choice. It just started happening to them. Really surprising. They got it under control eventually. It stopped being involuntary, but something came through. Other people find that they become really good artists after doing RV. It uses the right brain. Ingo Swann was an artist. It involves left and right brain processes working together. So surprising things can come out of it. Sometimes people have what appears to be paranormal contact during an RV session. I know people, and I wrote about this in Opening Minds, a case where a viewer back at Farsight felt like a ball of light came into the room while he was viewing an ET target. He wasn't told it was an ET target, but he said something came into the room and it actually hovered around there, and it was almost close enough to touch and so forth. I think he actually felt that he got scalded by it. We don't know exactly what this is. That's why I encourage people to proceed carefully, one step at a time. Don't just jump into it and want to do too much. Just do a little bit and see what happens. But it's real. It gets you in contact with something that you normally don't get in contact with, and you can use that in a variety of ways.
Now, you mentioned other speakers at Contact in the Desert, and I was very lucky recently to speak to Dr. Andrew Gallimore. Dr. Andrew Gallimore is an expert in DMT and other psychedelics. For you, is there much crossover in RVing and the potential use of psychedelics as well? Or do you think they are something that's best kept separate as to what they achieve?
Yeah, I haven't used psychedelics, so maybe I can't fully answer the question. The RV process is kind of a controlled process. So generally when you do it, you're discouraged from mixing it with anything else.
Okay.
Now, having said that, sometimes people we know, scientists and very creative people, seem to come up with a lot of good ideas. Even 100 years ago, the quantum physicists would come up with some of these ideas over a beer in the local brew house. And even a little bit of alcohol seems to be related to increased creativity. Nonetheless, this RV technique, I think it's generally best done just by itself. Enough is going on there. So it's my bias. I sort of think that they're separate processes. Nonetheless, when you do use, a psychedelic drug or something, it does shift your frequency a bit. You actually are getting real information. It's not just completely fictitious. We know from the scientific research, it takes pathways in the brain and makes them more open to receiving data, sensory impressions that would normally be filtered out. And now they're sort of on. And perhaps people would see, we've been talking about parallel reality, maybe they would see things that even I wouldn't see at the moment because that gateway is now open. It's conceivable that's what's happening.
It's an interesting idea, but like you say, that's one for you, and you've got Dr. Andrew Gallimore as well. Now,
Yeah.
listen, I want to get your thoughts before you go on the task force report, and I've
Yeah.
one or two questions off the back of that as well.
Mhm.
What were your thoughts when the report dropped a few days ago?
Yeah, on Friday, I was very, very happy with the report. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. I was hoping they would just say there's an other category we can't explain, and they did that. And I think that's a huge step for any government to say we don't know what's going on. Governments never like to do that. They're paid to know what's going on by their constituents. It's very high level of maturity to admit there's something out there and we don't know what's going on. And they said that only 1 out of 144 cases could be attributed to a weather balloon. Look how far we've come since the 60s, when it was 95% weather balloons and swamp gas and flocks of geese. And now they're saying that's only 1. And they didn't bring up flocks of geese. They didn't bring up misidentifications of Indians. I thought it was a very good start. Honestly, they said we don't have the right sensors to pick this information up. Aircraft aren't fitted with sensors that are designed to track these zigzagging UFOs that are moving at fast speeds. We need more resources. We should be taking this seriously because we don't know exactly in the other category. They went through the usual suspects, the US technology and foreign technology and all that. And airborne clutter, okay, fine. And that exists. But they did say there's another category we can't explain. Now, listen, we haven't seen the classified report. If you look at Twitter, some of the tweets from people like Bob McGuire, former intelligence official, said he spoke to someone who had been in one of these classified briefings. I believe he said at the NSA, a former colleague, someone on the same level of clearance that he was. And this person said they saw, if it's true, 40 minutes of what appeared to be science fiction-like activity on the screen. 40 minutes of solid, unexplainable UFO activity. They were gobsmacked, they said. Now that would be pretty astounding if this is what's coming out. I think this is perfect. You don't want it to all come out and wants everyone to panic. You don't need to say it's alien. As a scientist, saying we don't know is golden because it leaves the door open for other possibilities. And personally, I'm happy with it. Now, look, the follow-up on Friday is one of the higher level people at the Pentagon issued a memorandum. I think if you saw that said, okay, folks, the report said we need to take this seriously. We need to revamp our reporting protocols, the ways that we classify this information. We should be taking it more seriously. So I think it's off to a good start. If disclosure was really happening, this is exactly how I'd want it to happen. Not a big announcement from the president that extraterrestrials are visiting on a Friday afternoon, the day after disclosure way that Dolan and Zabel put it in their book. That's one way. The big announcement, and okay, everyone go home and digest it. I kind of prefer a slow trickle. I think it's more fun this way. I think more people will. The less you feel threatened, the more open you will be to the data. If it keeps going like it's going the past couple of months, we'll be moving in a very good direction over time. It could take years, but it'll be a lot of very interesting years as more information, maybe the possibility of public hearings in Congress. So I liked it. Sure, it didn't say they were interdimensional or ET. It just said other. And someone made a joke about this on Twitter, which I thought was maybe we should just call them the others.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at that tweet right now. I was going to ask you about it. It was Dan Warren who had tweeted it. Now, the thing about the others, though, I don't know if you've seen recently, Joe Murgia put a compiled list of all Tom DeLonge's claims from the last couple of years, and the language "the others" appears there frequently. Now, obviously, they've not said others within the report. You're taking then at that summary of other. However, that's exactly what I've been saying for months, that I just want to see an acknowledgement of other. Yes. And I've seen that language of the others as well. What do you think? Now, let's just open it up a little bit. They know there's something else, someone else, at least someone, if not multiple beings or entities.
Yes. Oh, yes.
What do you think's going on with the others then? What are these things potentially buzzing Navy carriers? What is it they're doing?
I don't know exactly what they're doing with the Navy carrier groups in the East and the West Coast. It's fascinating. I don't know what those objects are. I can't really rule anything out, and I can't rule out the fact that there could be other countries. I do study cold fusion and LENR, and I know other countries have made huge amounts of progress on this versus the U.S. They've never stopped studying it. There was a 30-year ban on it in the US. Honestly, since Fleischmann and Pons, you couldn't get grants for it. You couldn't get patents. Now, Lockheed has patents for cold fusion LENR. They call it coherent matter wave beams. We don't know exactly what it is, but the overall concept of the others, there is just no way to deny that there's other intelligence and life forms on the planet. And I believe witnesses. I wrote Black Swan Ghosts after interviewing a whole bunch of witnesses. When you encounter believable people and believable witnesses, they've never told their story to anyone else. They're not seeking any monetary gain. They don't want publicity. They just want to tell you their story, what they saw. And people are experiencing a variety of life forms that we generally don't talk about, all the way from cryptids to these hard-shelled UFOs and everything in between. So again, it suggests to me there's a whole spectrum of life forms out there that we share this space with. Now, most of the time we perhaps don't perceive them, or we're consciously pushing the information away. But I think it's there. I think it's certainly possible there's other civilizations on the planet that just choose not to interact with us very much. Maybe they're much older than we are, and they consider us kind of primitives. I mean, it's not that far-fetched. And they are under the oceans, under the ground. They come out. A lot of these it's the Navy. They're seeing these over ocean areas. There was that seamount, even that Fravor and other pilots saw, right? Where the Tic Tac. What was that? That suggests some sort of underwater object. Mm-hmm. So I would not be at all surprised if over the coming years we're told that there's other civilizations, not literally extraterrestrial. I guess people call them ultra terrestrials. There's someone else here that has more advanced technology. That would not be the most far-fetched thing I'd ever heard in my life. I can easily see that happening. And some of these UAPs, as they're called by the government, UFOs seen over water areas, could be these other civilizations. As Kevin Day and others suggested, maybe they're keeping track of marine life. Maybe they're concerned about how we affect marine life. I mean, it could be a variety of things.
Now, right now, it's baby steps. This is step one. We've got the mainstream is starting to talk about it with less of a stigma. We've got the military in the US particularly being told, talk about it, report on it. The stigma's pretty much, if you look at the memorandum, is gone because they're being told as a direct order to report on it. The public, though, that's a whole different conversation to really get going. At what point, though, down the line, do you think, does RVing have a place in this conversation down the line?
Yes, it really could, because it allows people to sort of see these things in another way with, newfound senses, newfound abilities. RV, for me, did go a long ways to convince me, as someone that was university trained. People that are university trained are in this box. I was in it too. You think you know everything by the time you got your PhD, everything you really, the basic fundamentals of reality. And let's say someone comes along and says, no, there's RV and there's these other life forms out there. And you think, sure, until you start running into witness after witness after witness says, I work for NASA. There's a lot more going on than they're telling the public. You find out there's a kind of a dark NASA. There's really a dark NASA that does things that they never show the public, with another launch ground somewhere out in the ocean somewhere, not at Cape Canaveral. That's what I'm told from people who've worked with this organization. So doing RV introduces some of these ideas. You can get these things as targets. Let's say someone targets you, gives you an RV session, NASA's alternate launch sites not shown to the public. And you just view this and you get something out in Kiribati or something in the South Pacific. I'm just making this up. I don't know where it is. The person didn't tell me exactly the island. You would just wonder, maybe this is possible. It kind of gets your imagination and curiosity going. But also, there's going to be a level of confusion within the public, but that's necessary to, the confusion is a necessary precursor to seeing reality in a new way. Now, luckily, we have podcasts like yours. We've got YouTube and Twitter and many places people can go now beyond the mainstream, which seems a little slow on the upside sometimes. To get information, there's many places you can get this information. And this seems to me the wave of the future is multiple sources of information, not just one authority. When the government says they don't know what these are, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo believe them when you interview them, and other podcasters. or from Tim McMillan's conversations with all his sources. You've had him on your show recently. They, you get the feeling they might know, but maybe there's a lot they don't know, and that's why they don't want to talk about it. And so it could be a little anarchic, but that can be a good thing, you know, because that's new information. It's been in a period of stasis for decades where this was all just explained away and people were ridiculed. And as you mentioned, Andy, what I really liked in this UAP report was they said there have been sociocultural stigmas against reporting this. You and I know that's true. I can't tell you how many pilots and military folk I've talked to who will talk to me off camera, off record, don't want their names used or their stories publicized because of the potential stigma. Many people like that. So I think what's going to happen the next stage is not just more information coming from the government. I think it's logical that new witnesses could come forward that we've seen them a little bit on Twitter. Maybe some of them will feel emboldened now that they're being encouraged by the Pentagon to come forward, that we won't punish you in any way for talking about. That's a big step, because, you know, people from the military will tell you your promotion can get held up just by the fact that your wife bounced a check by accident 5 years ago. That will come up at these promotion hearings. I've been told that everything comes up at your promotion hearings. The last thing you want coming up at your promotion hearing is UFOs. Let's say that changes and all of a sudden now that's seen as a plus, like we had Alex and Dietrich. She wouldn't come forward for quite a while. They were told she'd briefed Congress. No, I'm not criticizing her in any way, but she was afraid to come forward. I think that's what she said. And all of a sudden she's on 60 Minutes. Well, how many other Alex and Dietrichs are out there from other incidents? So I think we could see a really beautiful critical mass of witnesses come forward, which would be fantastic. With so much information and data, it could be overwhelming, right? All of a sudden people are rewarded for sharing their stories. People experience a lot. I'm here in New York at the moment where I'm talking to you from. Ground zero for the Hudson Valley UFO. Even my mom's friends, where I'm staying at the moment, my mom's place, I had friends of hers told me just a couple of weeks ago, oh yeah, I saw the Hudson Valley UFO coming down back from skiing in upstate New York one night, made those flat turns, huge triangle, blah. We're going to do interviews with them. The people around here have seen it. They never said anything to anybody. I never said anything, even in my own high school class. I mentioned Vinny, the wrestling coach, and the wrestlers from my high school class in 11th grade, 10th, 11th, saw a huge black triangle over Marinick High School. Never told anybody. I only found out about it a couple of years ago. So the next step, just beyond, you know, more information coming out from the UAP task force and Congress perhaps demanding more information, like something building up, is witnesses feeding into that. I think that would be a cool thing if that were to happen. It's possible.
Awesome. Sim, people can find, obviously, you've got a few different things going on. Your presentation on parallel realities, you've got a practical remote viewing workshop, and also a remote viewing panel as well. How else can people find your resources? Because you've got a few different sites. You've mentioned one, and you've also got the Mount Baldy Institute as well. Yeah.
So the most common question I get from people is, how do I start learning RV? And I've got a lot of free videos up there. You can just start trying it, and, you know, in an hour you can kind of figure out the basic steps. If you go to learnrv.org, you'll find a link for, you know, my sort of self-paced free class just from YouTube, you know, just a few videos to show you the basics. So learnrv.org is a good place. I'm on YouTube, Twitter, and my blog where I post, you know, new ideas, new articles and things related to this is New Crystal Mind, newcrystalmind.com.
Awesome. Sim, great speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking to you in a few months again on the podcast as well.
Okay, Andy, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, Sim. Have a good day.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Just say thank you, everyone, for watching the interviews with Ryan Sprague and Simeon Hein as well, and I hope you have a great time at Contact in the Desert this year. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditative gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? But if we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.